The Mexican children stolen from their parents is an absolute tragedy, and we're not talking about it anymore. But this is not the first time America has taken children away from their parents. No. The Mexican families torn apart by the current administration is not the first time, and it gets easier every time it's done. You see, in the 60s era, Cuban children were torn from their parents. It was called Operation Peter Pan. That's right. Under Operation Peter Pan, or Pedro Pan, more than 14,000 Cuban children were left alone without their parents. They boarded planes and left Cuba between 1960 and 1962. You see, the Catholic Church and other groups organized the program for fear that Cuban children were in danger of being sent to the Soviet Union and trained in communist teachings. How crazy is that? These beautiful Cuban children stayed in temporary shelters and awful camps in southern Florida until they were adopted by some American families or hopefully later reunited by their parents. Their life in these camps and being uprooted and thrust into a new culture and a new language was absolutely wrenching for these innocent children. And all because of political fear. Just like today's political fear. Many of these beautiful Cuban children never saw their parents and families ever again. Does this sound familiar to you? But despite the hardships, many of these Peter Pan or Pedro Pan children went on to become successful people. So as a result of the Cuban crisis, many Cubans began to move into South Florida in the U.S., but the welcome was far from warm. Much like today, when the Cuban exiles arrived in Miami, many white Americans showed particular hostility towards them. Whites resented them and their presence here because they spoke a different language. They were said to be too loud or too poor. And when the really dark-skinned Cubans began to move into white neighborhoods, they were met with much resistance. Cubans have told of their experiences of seeing signs that read, "No blacks, no dogs, and no Cubans." That's right. Many whites moved far into the suburbs to avoid being around anyone of a different race other than white. Does it sound familiar? Does this remind you of the era of today? Only today the other enemy of white America is now the Mexican. But all while this was happening to the Cubans, migrants were pouring in from Germany, Finland, Scandinavia, and they were met with open and welcoming arms. So what's the bottom line? Severe efforts have taken place in America to keep people of color from enjoying the so-called American dream, and they were treated less than human. Efforts went as far as separating the black slaves from their families and children, to separating Cuban families from their children, all in the name of political fear and white superiority mentality. But don't forget, America was stolen from its indigenous people. Americans massacred and killed the indigenous American Indian way before it was called America. The indigenous people here were literally slaughtered by the white man, and then he claimed this land for his own. Now, keeping other races out seems okay today. It seems normal because that's how this country was founded. Giving thanks, or Thanksgiving Day, I should say, it was a slaughter by the so-called pilgrims, and it's celebrated as a loving day. So we've got to wake up. America has no right to keep anyone out because America was viciously stolen from the original indigenous people in the first place. Well, like, subscribe, think for yourself. This is the Mayor Logic channel.